This story is titled, My Sister and Her Husband Moved In with Our Parents and Are Furious. I refused to babysit their kids while they went on a vacation. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey everyone, I've been lurking here for a while, but after everything that's gone down, I need to get this off my chest. So here goes. I'm Hannah, 22, and fresh out of college with a degree in finance. For as long as I can remember, I've been the one with a plan. Graduate high school, get into a good college, land a decent job, and move out. It seemed simple enough, right? Well, life had other ideas. I graduated, got my degree, and then found myself right back where I started. My parents' house in a small Ohio town. Don't get me wrong, I love my parents, Lisa and Gary. They're good people who worked hard to give me and my sister Jessica a stable life. But moving back home wasn't exactly the dream I'd been chasing for 4 years. The plan was to stay with them temporarily, just a few months while I job hunted and saved up enough to get my own place. It seemed logical. No rent, free food, and a chance to regroup while I figured out my next steps. I convinced myself it was a smart move, even if it stung my pride a little. At first, things went smoothly. Within a week, I landed a job as an analyst for Weston Group. It's a mid-sized firm that focuses on financial planning for small businesses. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was steady, and the benefits were decent. I came home that evening feeling like I'd taken my first big step toward independence. Mom was in the kitchen making dinner, and Dad was watching TV in the living room. I grabbed a plate of food, sat down at the table, and shared the news. "I got the job," I said, grinning. "I start Monday." For a second, I thought they'd be excited. I expected some congratulations, maybe even a "we're proud of you." Instead, they exchanged the look. You know the one. The kind of silent communication parents have when they're about to drop something you don't want to hear. Mom set her fork down and smiled tightly. "That's great, Hannah. Really, we knew you'd find something quickly." "But," Dad chimed in, "we've been meaning to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped. This wasn't going to be good. Mom sighed and folded her hands on the table. "With my arthritis getting worse, I've had to cut back my hours at the library. And your dad's hours at the auto shop have been reduced. They're talking about more layoffs, too." "And?" I asked, though I already knew where this was headed. "We could use some help with the bills," Mom said, giving me an apologetic smile. "Just until things stabilize. You wouldn't have to pay rent or anything. It's just the utilities and groceries have been harder to manage." I sat there, staring at my plate. When I moved back, I figured I'd pitch in here and there, maybe cover my own expenses. But this was more than I expected. Still, these were my parents. They'd always supported me, and they weren't asking for much. "Yeah, of course," I said, forcing a smile. "It's the least I can do." Looking back, that was the moment I should have set boundaries. But guilt is a powerful thing. For the next few months, life settled into a routine. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, and crash. I handed over a good chunk of my paycheck each month for bills, groceries, and whatever else my parents needed. On top of that, I took over small tasks they said they didn't have time for, like running errands for Mom when her arthritis flared up, or fixing Dad's Excel sheets because he wasn't a computer person. It wasn't just money, it was time, energy, and patience I hadn't planned on giving. At first, I told myself it was temporary, just a little help from my parents, who'd always been there for me. But as time went on, I started noticing little things. If I mentioned wanting to save for my own place, Mom would sigh dramatically and say, "It must be nice to think about moving out when the rest of us are struggling to get by." Dad wasn't much better. Anytime I spent money on myself, like when I bought new work clothes, he'd shake his head and mutter, "Some people have no idea how hard it is to make ends meet." It wasn't just the guilt trips. It was the complete lack of acknowledgement for everything I'd given up. My friends had stopped inviting me out because I could never afford to join them. My dream of moving to the city faded a little more every month as my savings account refused to grow. And when I told Mom I was considering taking a second job to save faster, her only response was, "Well, just don't let it interfere with what we need." That stung. What we need? I was pouring everything I had into holding this household together, and somehow it still wasn't enough. But I thought it wasn't malicious exactly. They weren't mean or demanding, but the guilt trips were subtle and constant, like water dripping on a rock. Meanwhile, I started feeling stuck. I'd originally planned to stay 3 months, 6 at most. But the more I helped out, the more they seemed to rely on me. The bills kept coming, and I kept paying, all while my dream of independence slipped further and further away. Still, I told myself it was temporary. I just needed to save a little more, and then I'd be out. I even started looking at apartments in the city, imagining what it'd be like to have a space of my own. But before I could take that next step, life threw me another curve. It was a Friday evening in late spring. I'd just gotten home from work and was looking forward to a quiet night of Netflix and leftovers. Mom was in the kitchen, and Dad was outside tinkering with the lawnmower. Everything seemed normal until the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my older sister Jessica standing there, looking frazzled. Behind her was Ryan, her husband, hauling in suitcases. Their two kids, Lily, 5, and Benji, 3, were running around the yard like sugar-fueled tornadoes. "Surprise!" Jessica said with a big, fake smile. I just stood there for a second, unsure what to say. Behind her, Ryan looked exhausted, lugging in suitcases and a duffel bag. "What's going on?" I finally asked, stepping aside as Jessica brushed past me like she owned the place. "We need a place to stay for a little while," she said, already heading for the living room. She plopped down on the couch and sighed dramatically. Ryan's consulting gig ended, and with my boutique slowing down, it's been hard to keep up with the rent. You know how it is. Except I didn't. I had no idea how you let things get bad enough to pack up your entire family and show up unannounced at someone else's house. Ryan finally made it through the door, his arms full. "Hey, Hannah," he muttered, barely making eye contact before heading upstairs with the bags. I was still standing there, frozen, when Mom rushed in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, my babies are here!" she exclaimed, pulling Jessica into a hug. "You poor things. You've been through so much. Don't you worry. We'll take care of everything." Dad came in a minute later, carrying Benji under one arm like a football. "This one nearly gave me a heart attack," he said, setting him down, running straight for the mower like it's a ride at an amusement park. Jessica laughed lightly, but I noticed she didn't bother apologizing or even looking at Benji to tell him to knock it off. I stood there watching the scene unfold, feeling like I was in some kind of alternate reality. Within minutes, my parents were doting on Jessica, like she was some sort of war hero who'd survived a great battle. Mom was already talking about dinner plans and where they could set up the kids' beds, while Dad offered to move his tools out of the spare room so they could have more space. Meanwhile, I was invisible. That night, I sat in my room trying to focus on a budget spreadsheet for work, but all I could hear was the chaos downstairs. Lily and Benji were chasing each other up and down the hall, screaming at the top of their lungs. Jessica's voice carried from the living room as she recapped her latest business struggles to Mom. I took a deep breath and reminded myself this was temporary. A few weeks max, I could survive that. By the next morning, it was clear Jessica and Ryan weren't going anywhere anytime soon. They unpacked every suitcase, filled up the closet in the spare room, and even commandeered a shelf in the pantry for the kids' snacks. And somehow, without anyone saying it outright, I became the designated babysitter. It started small. Jessica would casually ask me to keep an eye on Lily and Benji, while she and Ryan ran to the store. "It'll just be an hour," she'd say, already grabbing her purse. But that hour always turned into 2 or 3. The weekends were worse. I'd wake up on Saturday mornings hoping to relax, maybe catch up on some reading or Netflix, only to find Jessica and Ryan already dressed to go out. "We're meeting friends for brunch," Jessica would announce, handing me a list of kid-friendly activities she'd printed from the internet. "We shouldn't be too long." By not too long, she meant most of the day. The first time I tried to push back, Jessica acted like I'd just suggested leaving the kids in a ditch. "Hannah, it's just brunch! You don't even have plans. What's the big deal?" "I was planning to spend the day catching up on work," I said, pointing to my laptop. Jessica rolled her eyes. "You're just sitting there on your computer anyway. Can't you do that with Lily and Benji in the room? You're being so dramatic." The worst was when Mom jumped in. "Hannah, honey," she said, lowering her voice like she was about to deliver some ancient wisdom. "Jessica works so hard, and she deserves a little break now and then. You're young. This shouldn't be that hard for you." "I work hard too," I shot back. But Mom just waved me off. "Of course you do. But you're single, sweetie. You don't understand how much pressure comes with having a family to take care of." It was like my own struggles didn't even count, because I didn't have a husband and kids to stress over. No matter what I said, it always came back to how much harder everyone else had it. If I tried to set boundaries, I was being selfish. If I asked for a little space, I was making it all about me. And when Jessica and Ryan came home from their endless brunches or errands, they'd act like they'd just run a marathon. "You don't know what it's like out there," Ryan once said, flopping onto the couch like he'd spent the day digging trenches instead of sipping mimosas. It's exhausting. I wanted to scream. I didn't know what it was like. I just spent 6 hours stopping Benji from eating Play-Doh while Lily demanded a snack every 5 minutes. But of course, if I brought that up, I was complaining too much. I spent those Saturdays watching Bluey and trying to stop Benji from throwing blocks at my face, while Lily demanded snacks every 5 minutes. Mom and Dad conveniently disappeared during these marathon babysitting sessions, claiming they had errands to run or projects to finish in the garage. When I brought it up to Jessica later, she rolled her eyes. "Hannah, they're just kids. It's not that hard." Not that hard? Easy for her to say when she wasn't the one scrubbing crayon marks off the walls or trying to explain why eating Play-Doh isn't a good idea. The worst part was how little anyone seemed to appreciate what I was doing. Every time I brought it up, Jessica acted like I was being dramatic. Ryan barely spoke to me unless he needed something, and Mom and Dad seemed to think this was all perfectly normal. "You're such a big help," Mom said one evening when I mentioned how tired I was. "It's good practice for when you have kids someday." The constant guilt trips were starting to wear me down. Every time I thought about saying no or setting firmer boundaries, I'd hear Mom's voice in my head. Family helps family. But what about me? Didn't I deserve to have my own life? It wasn't just the babysitting either. My paycheck, which had been enough to cover the bills for 3 people, was now stretched thin with 5 extra mouths to feed. The grocery bills doubled overnight, and the utilities shot up too. I tried bringing it up one evening after dinner. "Hey Jessica, would you and Ryan be able to chip in for groceries this week?" She looked at me like I'd just asked her to donate a kidney. "We're barely scraping by as it is, Hannah, you know that." Ryan nodded solemnly. "It's tough out there right now." I bit my tongue and let it go, but inside I was fuming. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel like a prisoner in my own home. My bedroom became the only place I could escape, but even that wasn't safe. Lily and Benji loved to burst in uninvited, scattering toys and crumbs everywhere. It was clear to everyone except me that this wasn't temporary. Jessica and Ryan were making themselves too comfortable, and I was footing the bill, both financially and emotionally. I should have spoken up sooner, but every time I tried, I felt like the bad guy. I was constantly told I was overreacting or being selfish. So, I stayed quiet. And then, one evening, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but when you live in a house full of people who don't know the meaning of indoor voice, it's impossible not to overhear things. I was sitting in my room one evening, scrolling through job postings, anything to distract myself from the chaos downstairs, when I caught the tail end of a phone call Mom was having. "Yes, we're all going to Florida next weekend for Mary's retirement celebration. It'll be so nice to have the whole family together for a proper send-off," Mom said with excitement. I froze. Florida? Retirement celebration? Whole family? I got up and walked into the hallway, craning my neck to see if I'd misheard. Mom was still on the phone, pacing the kitchen with her back to me. "Of course, Hannah will be here to watch the kids. It just makes sense. No point in dragging them along to something they wouldn't enjoy." Ah, there it was. The whole family would be going to Florida, except for me. Apparently, I'd already been volunteered to stay behind and play nanny. I went back to my room thinking how they could just forget me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. It wasn't just the fact that I hadn't been told about the trip. It was that they didn't even think to include me. I wasn't invited, wasn't asked if I could babysit, and wasn't even given a heads up. They just assumed, because that's what my family did. The next few days were a blur of frustration and awkward silence. Jessica was busy shopping for vacation essentials, parading her new swimsuits and flip-flops around the house, while Lily and Benji wreaked havoc in the living room. Ryan talked nonstop about how much he was looking forward to kicking back on the beach. Mom, meanwhile, was in full-on planning mode, coordinating travel arrangements and double-checking her packing list. Dad, of course, went along with whatever she said, nodding at all the right moments, but not contributing much beyond an occasional grunt of agreement. No one mentioned the fact that I wasn't going. I tried to bring it up casually during dinner one night. "So, when were you all planning to tell me about Florida?" I asked, stabbing at my salad. Mom glanced at me, caught off guard. "Oh, I thought Jessica told you." Jessica didn't even look up from her plate. "I assumed you knew. Mom's been talking about it for weeks." "For weeks?" I wanted to scream. "Weeks, and no one thought to say anything to me?" "So, what's the plan?" I asked, forcing myself to stay calm. "You all head to Florida, and I just stay here with the kids?" "Well, Yes, Mom said matter-of-factly. It just makes the most sense. The kids wouldn't enjoy a retirement party, and someone needs to stay behind to look after them. You're so good with Lily and Benji, and it's not like you'd want to come anyway. That last part stung. Why wouldn't I want to come? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jessica finally looked up, her expression somewhere between pity and irritation. It's a family trip, Hannah. Adults only. You wouldn't even know anyone there besides Aunt Mary, and it's not like you're close to her. Dad chimed in, trying to smooth things over. We just figured this was the best arrangement for everyone. You'll have the house to yourself for a few days. Peace and quiet. Was he serious? How peaceful would it be chasing after two hyperactive kids all weekend, while the rest of the family sipped margaritas on the beach? I dropped the conversation after that. It was clear they'd already made up their minds, and nothing I said would change it. As the days ticked by, I felt more and more like an outsider in my own family. The excitement in the house was palpable. Jessica and Mom were constantly buzzing about outfits, itineraries, and which restaurants they'd try in Florida. Even Ryan, who rarely showed any emotion beyond mild annoyance, seemed genuinely excited about the trip. Meanwhile, I was invisible. It wasn't just the Florida trip, though. That was a pattern since we were young. Growing up, Jessica was always the star. She was the cheer captain, the one whose achievements were celebrated with balloons and banners. I was the nerd one, but that didn't mean much when Jessica's trophies lined the shelves, and her face was front and center in every family photo. Even now, years later, nothing had changed. Jessica was still the golden child, and I was still the afterthought, the one they called when they needed something, the one they relied on but never really appreciated. I tried to distract myself by focusing on work, but it was hard to concentrate with Lily and Benji constantly barging into my room or screaming at each other over toys. Jessica's version of parenting seemed to involve handing the kids an iPad and letting them run wild. Ryan wasn't much better. He'd plop himself on the couch and scroll through his phone while chaos unfolded around him. But things started to shift when one afternoon when I overheard Jessica talking to Mom in the kitchen. "It's just so nice to have Hannah around," she said. "I don't know what we'd do without her taking care of the kids. She's like the glue holding everything together." That's what I was to them, a glue. Not a person with my own life and goals, but the glue holding their lives together. That was when I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness and independence for a family that took me for granted. I spent the rest of the week plotting my escape. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life. If they could plan a trip without telling me, then I could make plans of my own. I tried to think of where I would go, then I remembered Casey, one of my friends from college, had mentioned going camping that weekend. She and a few friends were heading to Blue Ridge Falls, and she'd invited me to join them. At the time, I'd turned her down, thinking I'd be stuck at home babysitting. But now it felt like the perfect opportunity. I texted Casey that night. "Is there still room on the trip this weekend?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Of course! We're leaving early Saturday morning. You in?" I stared at my phone for a moment before typing back, "I'm in." The decision felt freeing. I was finally putting myself first. And this wasn't just a camping trip. It was a lifeline. A way to get out of the house and away from the constant chaos that had become my life. But pulling it off wasn't going to be easy. My family had a knack for sniffing out anything that didn't revolve around them. And if they figured out I was planning something for myself, it'd be over before it began. I had to be smart about this. The days leading up to Saturday were tense. Jessica was in full vacation prep mode, strutting around the house with new beach hats and a playlist she insisted on testing at full volume. Ryan spent most of his time fiddling with the kids' car seats and complaining about how much luggage they had to fit in the trunk. Meanwhile, Mom was darting around with a clipboard, checking and rechecking the packing list. "Hannah, don't forget, Lily likes her milk warmed before bed," she said, as if she hadn't already told me 3 times. "Oh, and Benji's picky about his pajamas. Make sure he's in the blue ones." I nodded along, biting my tongue to keep from saying something I'd regret. There was no point in arguing. I'd already been volunteered as the weekend nanny, and nothing I said would change their minds. By Friday night, the house was a zoo. Mom and Jessica were arguing over which snacks to bring, Ryan was trying to fix a squeaky suitcase wheel, and the kids were tearing through the living room like tiny hurricanes. Dad, as usual, had retreated to the garage to check on the tools, which I assumed was code for avoiding the madness. I watched it all from the kitchen, silently sipping my tea and counting down the hours until morning. Around 10 p.m., things finally started to settle down. Mom tucked the kids into bed, Jessica went upstairs to pack the last of her toiletries, and Ryan sprawled out on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I waited until the house was completely quiet before sneaking into my room and pulling out my duffel bag. I'd been packing little by little all week to avoid suspicion, stashing my hiking boots and clothes in the back of my closet. Now I carefully added my toothbrush, flashlight, and a few snacks before zipping it shut. My heart was racing, not with fear, but with excitement. This wasn't just about camping, it was about taking back control of my life. My alarm went off at 5 a.m. sharp. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my duffel bag, and tiptoed to the door. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence you only get in the early hours of the morning. I held my breath as I opened the front door, wincing when it creaked louder than expected. For a moment, I froze, half expecting someone to yell after me, but nothing happened. The air outside was cool and crisp. I took one last look at the darkened house, then climbed into my car and started the engine. As I backed out of the driveway, a surge of relief washed over me. I was free. The drive to Blue Ridge Falls was peaceful, almost therapeutic. The farther I got from home, the lighter I felt. I cranked up the radio and let myself relax for the first time in what felt like months. Although I kept thinking what would be their reaction when my family woke up, I tried to distract myself and focus only on me. Casey had sent me the campsite's address, and by the time I arrived, the sun was fully up. She was already there, unloading her car and setting up her tent. "Hey, you made it!" she called out, waving as I parked next to her. "Of course," I said, "wouldn't miss it for the world." The campsite was perfect, secluded enough to feel like a true escape, but not so remote that we couldn't find a decent trail or two. Casey introduced me to the rest of the group, a mix of her college friends and coworkers. Everyone seemed laid back and friendly, the kind of people who didn't ask too many questions. We spent the morning setting up tents, gathering firewood, and figuring out which trails to explore. By midday, we were deep in the woods. It felt surreal to be surrounded by nature instead of screaming kids and constant demands. Casey and I fell into an easy rhythm, chatting about work, life, and everything in between. She didn't pry about my family, and I didn't offer much. This trip wasn't about them. It was about me. That evening, we sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and swapping stories. "This is exactly what I needed," I said, leaning back in my camp chair and letting the warmth of the fire wash over me. "Same," Casey agreed, tossing another log onto the fire. "We should do this more often. Just get away from everything, you know?" I nodded, staring into the flames. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely at ease. No one was asking me for favors, no one was guilt-tripping me, and no one was expecting me to sacrifice my time or energy for their benefit. As the night went on, I found myself laughing more than I had in ages. It wasn't just the jokes or the stories. It was the feeling of being surrounded by people who didn't expect anything from me. During all this time, I didn't check my phone once. By the time we got back to the campsite that evening after we went hiking, I was exhausted in the best way. My legs ached, my face was sun-kissed, and my heart felt lighter than it had in months. I wasn't thinking about my family anymore, their expectations, or their constant demands. I was thinking about me, what I wanted, where I was headed, and how I was going to get there. That was, until I opened the front door. The house was a disaster. Toys were scattered everywhere. Plastic dinosaurs, crayons, and what looked like an empty bag of cereal spilled all over the couch. The faint smell of something burnt lingered in the air, and I could hear voices coming from the living room. "Hannah's here!" Mom's voice called out, but it wasn't her usual warm tone. It was sharp, like she'd been waiting to unleash something on me. I dropped my duffel bag by the door and walked into the living room. Mom, Jessica, Ryan, and Dad were all sitting there, their faces flushed with anger. Lily was crying loudly, while Benji was curled up on the floor, clutching a juice box. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on?" Jessica repeated, standing up and pointing a finger at me. "You disappeared without telling anyone. That's what's going on." "I told you I wasn't babysitting this weekend," I said, crossing my arms. "You didn't tell us where you were going or what the hell you were doing," Mom snapped, her face red. "We had no idea where you were. I'm an adult. I don't need to check in," I shot back, my patience already wearing thin. "Well, when we realized you weren't here with the kids, we panicked," Ryan added. Panic didn't even begin to cover it. According to them, when they realized I wasn't in the house Saturday morning, they freaked out. My car was gone, my room was empty, and I hadn't left a note. Instead of assuming I'd gone somewhere or taken a break, something I was long overdue for, they immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario. "We thought something had happened to you." Mom said, her voice trembling. We even called CPS. That stopped me in my tracks. You called CPS? For what? For abandoning the kids, Jessica yelled, as if that was the most obvious thing in the world. First of all, I said, raising my hand to cut her off, I never agreed to watch your kids this weekend. You all decided that on your own without consulting me. Second, calling CPS on me for not being here is insane. What exactly did you tell them? Hi, we wanted to abandon our own kids with someone who didn't agree to it, but now she's not home, so please arrest her? Did they laugh before or after they hung up on you? That's insane. It wasn't insane when we didn't know where you were, Mom started yelling. I couldn't take their shit anymore. So what happened when CPS showed up? They left after we explained everything, Jessica admitted, her voice quieter now. But do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? Embarrassing? I repeated, my voice rising. You called CPS because I didn't stick around to babysit your kids, and you're worried about embarrassment? The argument spiraled from there. Jessica accused me of being selfish and irresponsible. Ryan muttered something about how I'd let everyone down, and Mom kept going on about how I'd abandoned my family. Dad, of course, just sat there, shaking his head in disappointment like he always did when things didn't go his way. By the time the yelling died down, I was too drained to fight anymore. I grabbed my duffel bag and went upstairs to my room, slamming the door behind me. The mess continued into Monday. I left early for work, not wanting to deal with any more guilt trips or accusations, but my phone was already blowing up with texts. Mom, we need to talk about your behavior this weekend. Jessica, you really screwed us over, Hannah. Don't expect us to forget this. Ryan, you owe the family an apology. I ignored them all. At work, I tried to focus, but the tension from the weekend was still hanging over me. My coworkers could tell something was off, but I wasn't about to unload my family drama in the middle of the break room. By the time I got home that evening, I was bracing myself for round 2. Sure enough, the moment I walked in, Mom was waiting for me in the kitchen. We need to talk, she said, her arms crossed. I'm tired, I said, trying to walk past her. Hannah, she said firmly, stepping in front of me. This can't wait. I sighed and set my bag down. What now? Mom's expression softened, but her tone was still sharp. Your sister is hurt. She feels like you abandoned her when she needed you most. I stared at her, dumbfounded. She needed me? For what? To babysit her kids while she went on vacation? That's not my responsibility, Mom. You should do your part as a member in this family, she said, her voice laced with disappointment. Funny how that only applies to me, I shot back. When has Jessica ever helped me? When has anyone helped me? Mom opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Exactly, I said, grabbing my bag and heading upstairs. The next few days were tense. Jessica barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was only to make passive-aggressive comments about how hard it was to find good babysitters these days. Ryan stayed out of it, which was probably for the best, but the silence from him was almost worse than the arguing. Mom and Dad tried to act like nothing had happened, but every conversation was laced with guilt. We're a family, Mom would say at random, as if that was enough to fix everything. I knew I couldn't stay much longer. The house felt more suffocating than ever, and no amount of space or time was going to make this better. One evening, as I was folding laundry, Dad knocked on my door. Can we talk? He asked, his voice quieter than usual. Sure, I said, though I wasn't exactly in the mood for another lecture. He stepped inside and sat on the edge of my bed, looking down at his hands. Look, I know things have been rough lately, and I know you feel like we've been unfair to you. I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. But your mom and I are just trying to keep everyone together, he said. This family's been through a lot, and we're all trying to do our best. Dad, I get that, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. But I can't keep sacrificing my life for everyone else. I'm 22. I should be building my future, not cleaning up after Jessica and Ryan. He nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't really understand. We'll figure this out, he said after a long pause. Just give it some time. I nodded, but deep down, I knew time wasn't going to fix this. By the end of the week, I'd made up my mind. It was time to leave. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a battleground. I knew if I stayed any longer, I'd lose what little sanity I had left. I started searching for apartments. My savings weren't much after months of paying for bills that weren't mine, but I had enough to get started. I found a few listings that looked promising. Nothing fancy, but clean, small. I stared at my phone for a minute before dialing Aunt Mary. She picked up on the second ring. Hannah, how are you, sweetheart? She said, her voice warm and familiar. Hey, Aunt Mary, I'm okay, I guess, I replied, unsure how to start this conversation. She immediately caught the hesitation in my tone. What's going on? Is everything all right? Not really, I admitted. I don't know if you heard, but I didn't go to your retirement trip. I noticed, she said. Your mom said you were staying behind to help with the kids. I thought that sounded odd. Why didn't you come? I couldn't help but laugh bitterly, because no one told me about it. They just assumed I'd babysit, like always. Aunt Mary was quiet for a moment before letting out a sharp breath. That doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. Your mom mentioned how much you've been helping out, but it sounds like they've been taking advantage of you. Yeah, you could say that, I said. I'm actually thinking about moving out, but I'm not sure how to handle the fallout. Well, sweetheart, you've done more than enough. You're young. You shouldn't be tied down like this. Move out, set boundaries, and let them figure out their own mess. It's not your responsibility to fix everything for them. Hearing those words felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. She added firmly, and if you need help, let me know. You deserve better than this. That conversation gave me the push I needed. The next morning, I informed the landlord that I would no longer be contributing to the rent starting next month, and that my parents would need to take over. It was a step I'd been hesitant to take, but one I knew was necessary. After that, I spent the day packing. I didn't bother telling anyone yet. There was no point in starting another argument before I was ready to leave. I boxed up everything I could fit in my car, and the rest could wait. That evening, I came downstairs for dinner, ready to drop the bomb. The tension was already high. Jessica had barely spoken to me all week, and Mom had been hovering like a storm cloud. Can we talk? I said, setting my fork down. Mom looked up, wary. What is it, Hannah? I'm moving out, I said plainly. The silence was deafening. Jessica's fork clattered onto her plate, and Mom's jaw dropped. Even Dad looked surprised, though he quickly masked it with his usual frown. You're what? Mom asked, her voice shaking. I'm moving out, I repeated. I've already found a place, and I'll be leaving by the end of the weekend. But you can't just leave, Mom said, her voice rising. We need you here. The bills, the kids, are not my responsibility, I interrupted. I've been paying for this house, babysitting Jessica's kids, and putting my life on hold for months. It's time for me to live my own life. Jessica scoffed. Wow, so you're just going to abandon us? How selfish can you be? I turned to her, my patience officially gone. Selfish? Jessica, you've been living here rent-free, dumping your kids on me every chance you get, and contributing absolutely nothing. If anyone's selfish, it's you. That's enough, Hannah, Dad said sternly. No, it's not enough, I snapped. I've done everything you've asked and more, and all I've gotten in return is guilt trips and disrespect. I'm done. Mom's face crumpled, but I didn't let it sway me. I've already told the landlord I won't be contributing to the rent anymore, I added. So you'll need to figure that out too. Jessica looked like she might explode. Are you kidding me? You're just going to leave us with all the bills? How are we supposed to manage without you? Not my problem, I said, echoing her own words from months ago. The next morning, I loaded the last of my boxes into my car. Mom stood on the porch looking heartbroken, but she didn't say anything. Dad stayed inside, avoiding the whole thing. And Jessica, she didn't even bother coming downstairs. As I pulled out of the driveway, I felt a mix of emotions, but mostly I felt free. The first few days in my new apartment were surreal. Mom tried calling a few times, but I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to deal with her yet. Jessica sent a few angry texts, accusing me of abandoning the family, but I blocked her number. Aunt Mary, on the other hand, called to check in. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, she said. It's not easy to stand up for yourself, especially with family, but you did the right thing. Thanks, Aunt Mary, I said, smiling. I think so too. It's been a few months now, and life is finally starting to feel normal. I've reconnected with old friends, picked up some new hobbies, and even started saving for a trip to Europe next year. As for my family, I've kept my distance. Mom still sends the occasional guilt-laden text, but I've stopped letting it get to me. Jessica and I haven't spoken since I left, and honestly, I'm fine with that. I know they're struggling to adjust, but that's not my responsibility anymore. I've spent enough of my life putting them first. It's time to put myself first for a change. And you know what? It feels pretty damn good.